Good morning, all. Myself Chandra, and today we are going to discuss about the routers within Mulesoft. And routers are called as the flow controllers. How the flow has to be executed, what are the message process that will be executed. It can be defined by using the routers. So we have different types of routers: choice router, scatter gather, first successful, round robin router, and APK router. And the AP kit router, we will discuss it when we are going to discuss the RAML. And today we are going to discuss about the first four routers. So let us discuss one by one. The first router is choice router. So choice router is something like we need to configure at least one route. And by default, there will be one default route also within the choice whenever we configure choice router in MuleSoft. And the choice router will execute the first matching condition route and provide the results. And whatever the message process that we are going to configure within that particular route, it will be executed. And if we have configured more than two routes with the same condition or expression, then only the first route will be executed if it matches the expression or condition. So we will see that with the example and the scenario. So first we have a requirement like we need to get the suppliers information. Okay, we have suppliers records, and we also have the status active or inactive. So we are going to send a parameter to the service, and if the parameter is not set, we need the list of all the suppliers. That is one condition. And another one is that if we do send a format parameter to the service, if it is XML, then we need that in the XML format, that suppliers information to be in XML format response. If the format is other than the XML, or if it is a JSON, then we need the response in JSON format. So by default, we need the JSON format. Otherwise, if we have defined more than one condition, in that case, we can even mention that how the data has to be presented. We will see it one by one. I'm going to Anypoint Studio, and within Anypoint Studio, I'm going to create a new XML configuration file, routers data sets. So first we will define the flows with the data set. I'm going to create a private flow. Sorry, I'm going to create a subflow. So this subflow is routers suppliers subflow. So in this subflow, we are going to maintain the suppliers information. For that, I'm going to use the set payload, or we can even use transform message. So transform message will be used to map the data and the request or payload. Okay, here I'm going to mention the format as JSON format, and I have this data sets. Let me show you suppliers data set. We are going to use this. So this suppliers data set is having the information like what is the supplier and the supplier number, and also whether it is active or not. And we have information like the state information also for multiple suppliers. Now we will create one more XML routers implementation. So within routers implementation, I will add a flow to expose the service with choice resource. Choice routers implementation. I'm going to add a HTTP listener. Mention the path name as choice. And here we have the listener, HTTP listener config, which is running on 8081 port on localhost. And the method is get method. Now define the variable which will hold the information of the query parameters like active or not, status, and this status variable is going to hold the information of the query parameters. So we can access the query parameters by using attributes keyword, attributes dot query params dot status. So I'm going to send the status whether active or not. So whenever I receive active, I want the information of the active suppliers. Okay. And if this parameter value is not sent, then I want all the suppliers information. Now we are going to refer the flow that we have defined in our previous step, suppliers dataset. Drag and drop a flow reference, and then here on the flow name, search for that particular one. So routers dataset suppliers subflow. Save the changes. So we have said that the requirement is like whenever, once again, we need to send a parameter. If it is not sent, we need all the list of suppliers. Now drag and drop the choice component from the MULE palette. So by default, it will have two routes. One is with when conditions expression and one is with the default route. If we want to add more routes or more configuration, then we can do it. So first we will add a when condition with vars.status. If the status is active, then we want to list the active suppliers list. Add a transform message in the first choice route. We can add multiple message process in this particular route. So I'm going to add a condition payload. From the payload, I want to filter the active suppliers. So there is a field is active in the suppliers list of records or array of records, and the value is yes or no. So we are going to filter only yes is active yes, then only we are going to return the active suppliers list and add a logger here. Active suppliers. You can even print the payload. Likewise, we want to add one more condition and add a logger. Drag and drop this logger to the choice router. Here we can see a vertical line. You can add this logger and it is going to add one more row. In the second expression or second root of when condition, provide the value as vars.status equal to inactive. And here we are going to add one more transform message. In the transform message, we will provide the condition. We need payload, but we want to filter only the inactive suppliers. So we will mention no. And by default, we want all the suppliers information. List all suppliers. payload. Inactive suppliers. Here we will print the payload. So whenever we add these loggers, it is going to print in the console. Save the changes and run the application. The application is deployed. Now we will go on test in the Postman. So to maintain separate workspace in the Postman, click on the workspaces and create workspace. So provide the workspace name as Mars and click here personal. Because we are going to create the projects and we can save this request for the future purpose also. I'm going to mention HTTP localhost and 8081 is the port, and we have a choice as the resource. So send a request, and whenever we send the request, we will get all the list of suppliers that was configured in the subflow. If we see this from the subflow, we have configured this transform message and the payload. Here we have configured this data to the payload. So within the transform message, we have another parameters also, like where this script is going to produce output and assign the values. So here by default it is assigned to payload. If you want to assign these values to different attributes or variable, we can even define that from the transform message. Okay. Now let us try to send the value of status in query parameters. So to send the query parameters value, add a question tag at the end of the resource and add the name and then value. So we are going to send the active as the query parameter and we will observe the result before we send the request. If we observe, we even have the inactive suppliers list, so which is a human brain supply chain, which is inactive. Let us send the request now. So we have sent a request and we are receiving only the active suppliers as a result. If we observe here, we have only 3 suppliers records of information now. Now let us try to send the inactive as a query parameter value and send the request. Now we are receiving only the inactive suppliers. This way we can configure the choice condition. So whenever we configure the choice condition, it is going to execute this expression, and whenever the condition is matched, then it is going to process that request to the particular route. So in our first scenario, we have sent a request with the status active. So this condition was matched and the message processed in this first route are executed and we have received the request of active suppliers list. And we can even observe what are the loggers that was printed. Let us try to clear the logs and send one request and observe with the logs active. So we will observe the log. Yeah, if we see here, we have active suppliers. That means the message processors in this particular first route are executed because the choice condition with this expression is matched. And in our second scenario, if we send inactive, I'm going to clear the console again. Whenever we send the inactive as a parameter, then it is going to execute the second route. To make sure that it is executed in the second route, we have configured separate logger and unique logger. And here we are printing the inactive suppliers as a message and the payload. So we can see that inactive suppliers list only here. Because the second condition was matched. So whenever the condition is matched, that particular route will be executed and all the message process will be executed in that particular route. If there is any exception in that particular message process of that route, then we will get an exception. And if we send any of the other value or if we do not send the query parameter, then the conditions within the choice router will be routed to the default route. I mean, if none of these choice route conditions are matching, then it will be routed to the default route. So that's why we can see all the suppliers list. I'm going to disable this query parameter. We are not sending anything and observe the result. Here, if you see, we are having the list all suppliers information and it is having all the suppliers record. This way we can configure the choice router. Now, within the choice, we will include one more scenario. We have received active or inactive suppliers, that is fine. But apart from that, we also wanted to send one more parameter format, but this time we will send this format in the headers. Let me say it is a header parameter. Format is XML. Then I want to send the response in XML format. Let us try to make that change. In headers, I'm going to add a key format and the value as XML. Let us send this request. So when we send this request, we are not receiving XML format. We are still receiving the JSON response only. So to make this work, we need to apply few more changes or we have to enhance the service. For this, let us add one more choice condition after this first choice. And within this choice condition, I am going to check the value like vars dot. We will define this as a format equal to XML. And we will do one thing, this format, right? So we can even consider whether it is the uppercase XML or lowercase or a init cap, whatever the format we wanted to convert into lowercase first, and then we are going to check this condition. So add a transform message here, add logger, add a logger and default route also. So here we will mention the XML response. We're not printing the payload, we are just adding a logger, JSON response. So by default, we want to return the JSON response if this condition is not matching. And first, let's define this variable, format variable. I am going to create a variable, search for set variable in the MULE palette. And variable name is format. And the value we need to retrieve from the request attributes headers, attributes.headers.format. And here we will change the application output as XML and add a payload. We will see if there are any conflicts or issues, and accordingly we will make the changes. So redeploy this application. So if you want to redeploy this application whenever you make the changes and you save the changes, you need to mention that in the project menu, build automatically has to be enabled. And we can see that the application has redeployed. Clear the console and send a request. We are sending format and we are not sending any status. So we need to list all the suppliers. Send the request. Whenever we are trying to get the response in XML format, it seems we have an issue. Encoding is UTF-8, application JSON, and content cannot convert to string. So let us try to produce this output in XML format. So we are going to define a metadata. So to define this metadata, first we need to add the XML response. So in example, I'm going to add the particular example, add a file Here, suppliers XML response dot XML. This will be our XML data, and copy the response format. I will provide these formats to you in the description. So here we are trying to mention that there is a supplier's records, and each supplier will have different fields. So we have address. Let us check there is some issue. State, okay. Add a state ending tag so that this issue will be resolved. And supplier. So I'm going to say this example, XML example here. And we need to provide that example in the output metadata, and we will format and map the transformation. Define metadata and add the type. Suppliers DW XML response. Create type, and here select the type as XML instead of schema. Select example and select the example from the folder structure. Examples, suppliers XML, and click on select. Here we have the suppliers information. So let us try to map the request and response. So we have the supplier number from our flow reference, dataset suppliers flow. So add that to the sub number. Whenever we drag and drop this mapping, then we can see that there is a mapping added, and also the code has been generated, script. So what is it saying? There is a supplier's record as a header. It will be the root element. Since it is an XML, we definitely need one root element for the structure. And under that, we are going to add the sub elements or tail element. And this payload supplier is the records of array. Then we need to use map. So map is going to loop through each record within that array. And this will be a named function because there is a payload one and index. So we are going to map other fields by writing the fields. So we will name, and from which field we want to add this payload 01 dot supplier name. If I observe this, whenever we added this within the script, or then also there was a mapping added dynamically or automatically from the supplier name to name within this mapping. So let's add another value as well. Let us check this status. So we want the status as is active and address. Let me drag and drop these components. So address I want on address line 1. Okay, let me clear. And state needs to be mapped to state within the address. So in this way, we can transform the JSON format to XML format by providing an example, and we can add this drag and drop mechanism, and also we can even write the script here so that it will produce the result in XML format. Let us save the changes and observe the result. Send a request from Postman. Now we can see the supplier's information is written in XML format, and there is a root element. So this root element is necessary in the XML format or XML structure. In our JSON structure, we don't need this. We can directly have the list of suppliers in array format. Okay, and this we will call it as child nodes under the root node of suppliers. And there is one more child node under the suppliers root node. Under the suppliers parent node. So this will be root node, and this will be the parent node for address child node. Like that, we can have tail node or nested element nodes and the values here. So this way we can have the information. So this is our XML structure. Now let us try to send the format in uppercase and observe the result. So whenever we are sending the format in uppercase, we are still receiving the JSON format, but which is not as expected. So for that purpose, we will make a small change. So here, try to add a lower function and assign the value. So whenever we add a lower value, it should be having some value, and then it will return the result. So save the changes. Now go to Postman and send the request. So now we can see that whether this value is lowercase or init case, we are still getting the response because we have added that logic within our API or service, and it is able to handle whatever the case it is, and we are still providing and able to provide the result in correct format. We will try one more scenario. Remove this format header and send the request. So whenever we are not sending this format, then we can see that it is able to produce the result in JSON format, because in our second choice route, we have mentioned that default route is just having one message processor as a logger. And after that, we do not have any transformation or any message process. So whatever the result that it was having before this choice route, it is going to produce the same result to this service response. So this is how we can use the choice router within Mulesoft flows. Now we will understand the second router, which is a scatter gather router. So scatter gather is whenever there is a necessity or requirement, when we want to send the same request to multiple systems or more than one system and want to perform some activity and get the results. Or even if we want to send the same payload to multiple systems and store that information, then we can use the scatter gather. And one more thing is that we need to configure more than one route, and also it is going to validate the request and send the request or payload to multiple routes. And then we need to consolidate the results from all the routes that we have configured. And if there is any error within these routes, any of the routes, then it will throw an exception, will composite routing exception, and the scatter gather will be failed. We need to remember that. So to work on this scenario, let us try to evaluate the use case. So we have a supplier, and for that particular supplier, there are list of items. I mean, what are the items that he is able to accept the orders, or he is able to deliver the items. So he is having list of items. So these list of items we are stored in two different systems, system B and system C. Okay. And we want to collect both the systems data and produce the result to our consumer application, which is system A. So this is our use case. So to achieve this, we are going to make use of scatter gather, because in scatter gather, we can send the same request at once and we can get the information from more than one system or multiple routes. So I'm going to first, uh, first let us see this list of items data. So this is a list of items data on system B. If we see here, this is our items data. It is having item ID, name, and the type of item, and also who is the supplier. I am going to store this information in the subflow database. For that, we are going to use routers datasets and add a subflow. And name this routes datasets as items subflow and add a transform message. In transform message, this dataset is of JSON, and you can add the dataset example. So we have a value. Since it is an items data, I'm going to use this items keyword. Let me maximize first. So this is the items data, and it is a list of items. And add one more flow. Sorry, subflow. And this will be routers data, items, and it is system T subflow. Let me change the flow name. Items system B subflow. Add a transform message. And now, instead of directly storing the data here, we are going to store this data in a separate file. For that, whenever you drag and drop this message or a transform message component, there is a icon on the right side of this payload text. So click on the pencil icon, and here we can see that output currently the source code is within inline. That means we are within this transform message. Let us try to create a file. For that, first we will add the example. Yes. So the data from system B and system C might be the same data structure, or it might be having a different data structure. But within our flow, we need to make sure that we are going to consolidate the result into a canonical format and then provide the result. So right now, I'm having the same data structures, but here I'm removing these items. So I will have directly the list of items. Okay. Now click on pencil icon and here provide the file. File system C items underscore items list dot JSON. So we are going to store this information within the resources and as the DW file. Save. Okay. And here you do not see any difference, but in the back end, it will make a difference. So for example, let us refresh this source main resources folder. And here you can see that the data view file has been added. Let us try to open this. So the example that we have added within that data view transformation, now we can see as a separate file. And let us see that in the flow. So here we have the transformation message. right click on it and go to XML. And if we see here, it is trying to set the payload from the resource, not directly. In our previous case, if we see, there is a set payload and we are having the C data. That means we are directly setting that example or transformation message to the payload within the data itself. But in this case, we have a separate resource file as a DW, and we are referring that file from the data transform message. So we can refer that particular file at multiple locations if we have externalized the data view. Now, our requirement is, let us recapture the requirement. We have system B and system C list of items, and we want to gather that items and provide the result. For that, I'm going to routers implementation. Here, add a flow. We can stop this execution. Once our changes are completed, then we can deploy the changes. Add a sticky listener, and then here mention a scatter gather. In this particular flow, we are going to mention the variable. So this variable, I am going to get the value from our input request. So it is a supplier num, and the value I wanted it from payload dot supplier num. So this is our input request. So we are going to receive a single record, supplier record, and in response, we are going to return the list of suppliers along with items as well. So our data will look like items. Within this, we will have different items list that are available in the systems. For example, this is our item. This is just one example. Likewise, we'll have multiple items if there are any items associated with the supplier. So for this, we are going to use the scatter gather. In the scatter gather, we can even mention the timeout for that particular routes. I mean, how much time the scatter gather has to wait to receive the response from the routes. So here we are going to add a logger. Remember, we need to add at least 2 routes in the scatter gather. Route 1 or system B route. And this will be our system C route. Add a flow reference. Because we have defined this data sets in the subflows, we are going to refer the flows. Check this routers. One second. System B subflow. Add one more flow reference in the route B. And select system B subflow. Save the changes. And this result will be produced as a object or default mule object with the consolidated results, and we will try to see that without any transformation. So we are going to send the request and we are going to collect the results from two different routes. But as of now, we are not using any filter conditions or mapping condition to get the particular supplier's information. I'm going to run the application. Application is deployed. Let us send the request from Postman. So this is our choice. As we have discussed, we need to save this request. So you can save the request here. Click on save drop down and save as. This will be our choice. And this choice condition or choice service you wanted to store in as a sum collection, you can do that collection. So it is the routers collection. So you are going to store this under the mods workspace under roots. One second, it will be routers, not the roots. Let me remove this later. I'm going to create one more routers and create it and save the request. So likewise, you can even create a copy of that particular request. Let me check. So here you can delete this roots and click on these horizontal dots and create a duplicate. So instead of choice, let us make this change to scatter gather. And our resource name is scatter gather. Copy this, add here. And let us send this request. So whenever we are sending a request, we are getting a result, but it is in the text format of the JSON request hash mapper. No, sorry, it is a Java hash mapper result. So to combine this result, we can have the transformation and get the information. Go to transform MULE palette and add a transform message. And within transform message, we are going to provide the JSON output. And in JSON output, we will mention the payload. And also here we will assign the value of the method as post method because we want to send the payload, and from the payload we want to derive a value of supply number and filter the result. So have a variable. So instead of defining the variable at each root, if we define the variable before the scatter gather, the same variable will be propagated to all the roots. Supplier number, and here payload dot supplier number. Save the changes. Send the request once the deployment is successful. Now we can see that method is not allowed and it is returning 405 error code because we have make a change to allow only the post method. So send the request and also add a body. Here, click on the body and provide raw and select the type as JSON. So we will copy that request from our list of data. Now we will send a request. So whenever we are sending this request with input data and we are sending supplier number as sub1. So it needs to list only the list of suppliers for supplier 1 items only. But as of now, we can see that it is returning a JSON request of object with 0 and 1 indices. Let me see that. Yeah. 0 and 1 indices are key values. Because we have configured two routes, it is going to produce two indexes of result. First index is from the first route and second one is from the second route, and it is having all the required data. Like if there is any exception payload or inbound attachments or outbound attachments or property names. If there are any, then it will try to add them and it will display. But as of now, we have only the payload from each route. And the payload from the first route is having from system B is items data of object. So list of items we have with a key name of items. And in our second request, sorry, in our second route, we have direct array of records without any key name, and it is having the list of items. So let us try to combine these two results because it is having items as a key, and in the second one, we do not have any key. So we need to combine these two results first. For that, go to transform message. So to access the first route of records, we can use payload of 0 dot payload. And within the payload, we have information under the items. And default add it as array. And from the second route, also we are receiving the information, but that is with the index 1, and we are having the records under payload. There is no key like items. So we can directly add the result. And here also add the value as default. So whenever we mention this default, that means if there is no value or payload from that particular expression, then it is going to assign a default value. This is our payload. I'm going to our payload result. And let me add variables also. If there are any variables, that will be displayed. Save the changes and deploy it. Once the application is deployed, let us try to send the request. So even though we are not sending without this body or supply number, we are still able to get the result. Let us remove the supply number from the input request and send the request. So we can see that now we are transforming that consolidated scatter gather result into a transformed structured format, having payload result with all the data sets like item ID, information, and list of items with the type and supplier number. So from this result, we need to filter only the particular supplier record. That we can do in the next step. And let us observe what are the variables that are defined here. So there is a variable like supplier number, but the value is null because we are not sending the value within the payload. Let us send the value and send a request and observe it. So whenever we are adding the value within the payload, we can observe that value is returning from the response because we have added this under the variables with vars keyword. So to access this vars within the payload, we can use vars. If we want to access particular variable, we can use vars dot that particular variable name so that it will assign only that particular variable values. Now, if you want to access any attributes information, you can do that by using the keyword attributes within the transform message. Now, within this payload result, we have this information. Now we want to filter the result. So how can we do this? We have this payload result, and after that, we can even add another transform message, or we can do that in the same transform message also. But to have To simplify it, I'm adding one more transform message, JSON. Here I am providing final result. Let me add supplier. So this supplier, we need supplier information and also the list of items. So for that, we need to add the result. So here payload dot where sorry payload dot variables, because in our previous step we have a payload and that is having three different keys: payload dot variables, and also attributes, attributes info, and this supplier information is under payload dot payload result. But this payload result we want to apply some filter. So filter this and add a value dollar dot. From the filter we can see this result. Copy this and add this in the condition. So from this condition we want to check the value from the variable vars dot supply number. Whenever our values are going to match, and it has to apply this record and list only the particular items. So save the changes. You can even modify this set consolidated output. And here set items, comma, suppliers response. So that it will be meaningful, so that any developer can understand it, what we are doing inside this operation or component. Now send a request. Whenever we are sending a request, now we can see that there are items that are applicable to this particular supplier, like supplier number 1. As of now, we do not have any attributes information. That's fine. Let us remove this supplier 1, remove this supplier number and send a request. So if we are not sending this supplier, then we are not receiving any items information, and also the variable supplier number is coming as null. So instead of that, you can even apply some more validation, like the supply number is mandatory and we need to throw an error. So those kind of validations and choice route we can implement even in the category also. So let us do that. Choice router. And in this choice router, I want to perform the operations when there are values. Otherwise, I don't want to perform this operation. That's the supplier number. So I want to check if the supplier number is available or not. If is empty or blank, you can even option is blank. That means if the supplier number is blank, then we want to execute it. But our condition is that if it is not blank, then only we want to execute this series of message processors. Otherwise, we want to throw an exception. Transform message. Within this transform message, add a message. Please provide supplier number in payload. And also here we have the items. And we also want to display this supplier information along with the items. And how can we do that? Here we have the items information and have a record of supplier. Under the supplier, store that information before we even send the request to the scatter gather. So I'm going to add one more variable. Input request. And this input request is payload. From the input request, we are going to assign that value. We want to add that vars dot input request. So under that input request, I want the items as well. So to add two results, so this is an object. If we see here, this is an object, and this object I want to be included under the supply request. So add a plus. So we are assigning the value and combining the result. Save the changes. So what we are doing, we are declaring two variables. One is for supply number and input request. And we are checking whether supplier value is available or not. If it is not available, then we are throwing a message that we need to provide a supply number in payload. If the value is available, then we are sending that request to two different systems and getting that information and consolidating the result. Let us send a request. Yeah, now if we observe, we have the supplier information. Under the supplier, we have all the required information so that we do not need to worry about this information as well, what we have sent and all. So it is all dependent how we want to produce the result, and it will be agreement of contract that will be derived. Now we have the supplier active and also the address information. Under that, we have items information. Now let us try to send another supplier and observe the result. Yeah. If we see here, we have supplier, and under the supplier, we have a list of items that are related to supplier 2 only. And also in the variables, since we have defined two variables before that operation, those two variables we can see it in the result. Now let us try to send a request supplier 3 and observe. So for supplier 3, we have supplier information, but the items is coming as empty. That means there are no items associated to this particular supplier. This is how we can use the scatter gather information. And also, if you want to use this request and provide a confirmation or provide a condition within this subflows also, you can perform that validation as well within the subflows, because we are sending that particular request to each of the flows using scatter gather. This is about scatter gather. And if there is any exception in any of the route, then it is going to throw an composite routing error. Let us try to create an error. I'm just going to add a expression. I'm going to define a variable. This variable, new supplier number. Here I'm going to convert the existing value vars.supplier number as number, and we will see the result. Because our supply number is of data type string, and we are trying to convert that string value into number. So whenever we are trying to convert a non-number value, it will throw an exception, and we will see how the exception will be thrown. send the request. We can see the exception in root 0. That means in the first root there is an exception. It is trying to convert so and so value. And this way we can observe that the entire scatter gather itself has been failed. It is having a caught exception and exception strategy. And if you have configured any exception within here, you can observe that it is throwing a composite routing exception. So by default, scatter gather will throw composite routing exception. Yeah, that is about scatter gather. Now, let us understand one more router. There is a round robin router. So round robin router is mainly for having the multitasking or parallel processing. So that the request, whenever we send multiple requests, so instead of sending the request to the same uh, route, it is going to process it to the immediate next route, and it will try to balance the traffic. So in router, for this round robin router, we need to configure more than one route, and also the routes will be executed in multitasking or load balancing way, and each time the request will be sent to the next immediate router. For example, we have configured three routes. So for the first request, it will send the request to first route, and for the second request, it will send the request to second route, and third request, it will be sent to third route. And the first request will be sent to the first route because all the routes have been successfully completed. So it is going to store that information inside the Mulesoft memory, and it will know which route it has to execute for the next request. So we will understand this in a real-time scenario. Let us see. We have system D and system E having same sets of data. For example, there are two databases or two systems which are having same suppliers information. Okay, and we need to get the response from the system. So whatever the system that is available, or whatever the route that is going to execute first, it can give the response. So to configure that, we can use the round robin router. So let us first define the data sets for system D and system E. Subflow, data set, supplier, system E, and another flow, system E. I'm going to add a transform message in both the subflows. In here, I'm going to add the same set of suppliers. We have added the suppliers, and this supplier information, for suppose we are going to store in the file. I mean, in general scenario, the data will be coming from another system API, which we are going to connect to the target system. But here we are trying to get this information within the MULE application, this MULE application only. Under resources, DW, go to XML, and here refer the file. So you can see that same data we are using But in general scenario, as we discussed, we are going to get this information from another system API or from other web service, or it might be a database call. Now we are going to define one more service, define a flow in routers implementation. Add HTTP listener. This will be round robin. So I'm giving round and add a round robin. Search for round robin in the MULE palette. And here, if you see that, we can see it is going to circle. I mean, once the cycle is completed, it is going to repeat the cycle. And each request will be sent to a different route. Now I'm going to add a logger and add that to different routes. And I am going to add one more route. And in this route, I'm not going to get any response. Saying system D route. System E route. No data from this route. Or we can say unknown route. Unknown route and no data from this route. I'm going to add flow reference. So we can configure series of events within any route. It can be one or more than one. It is depends on the requirement. So click on this and select the system D subflow. I'm going to add a simple transform message in the route 3. And here I will mention the same message. Save the changes and test it. Going to Postman. And now we need to save this request as a scatter gather. And we will create one more request, duplicate it. And instead of this scatter gather, we are going to store it as or save it as round robin router. Round robin. And here also we need to change the resource name, round robin, and use a get because we are not going to send any information and send this request. And if we observe this, we are receiving the data from the root and observe the logs. I'm going to create the console. Let me check. We have received all the suppliers list fine. I'm going to send one more request and observe the log. Here we have system E root and we will send one more request. Now it is going to the unknown route and no data from this route. And we can see that particular response as well. Now 3 routes have been completed since we have sent 3 requests. Let us try to send one more request. So whenever we send the 4th request, Once all the routes are completed, then it is going to recycle and send the information to the first route again. So system D route is executed. Like that, for each subsequent request, it is going to send an information to the next or immediate process or the route, so that the traffic will be divided and sent to a different process or to the different route. I mean, it is mainly like the multitasking purpose. So this is how we can configure the round robin router within MuleSoft. This is all dependent. I mean, if the source systems are not dependent on the kind of response, then we can use the round robin. Yeah, so if we want to get the information from particular system or particular route, then we need to use the choice router. And if we want to consolidate the result from all the systems, then we can use the scatter gather. And if they are not dependent on the response, but if they want the result from any of the system, then we can use the round robin. But this will be a rare scenario where we are going to use the round robin. But this is how we can configure the round robin router. And our next router is first successful router. So in our first successful router also, we have to configure more than one route. And the behavior and execution of this first successful router is, if we have configured a series of message processors or more than one message process in the particular route, those message process needs to be executed successfully. And uh, then only we can consider that route is successful. Otherwise, if there is any exception in the route, then it will try to execute the next route in that configured routes on the first successful. And then it will try to evaluate the message process in the route. If, for suppose, we have configured the two routes or three routes and none of the routes are executed successfully, all the routes having some exception, then it will throw an exception and it will try to fail that particular process. We will try to configure this and we will see a scenario. Now let us understand this. So we want to list the items information from system B or system C. Okay. But we want to check this source information, system B or system C, and provide the response. And also we wanted to provide some conditions on that particular route, and we will try to give some errored expression in the route, and we will see how it is going to give the response. Add a flow. Within the flow, add a listener, is first successful, and add a first successful component into the flow. So in this flow, we are going to add a logger, system C route, add a flow reference. So we have configured first successful, and in the first route, we have system C route and a flow reference to the system C items flow. And in the second route, we have system B route, and we are going to get the information from system B route items subflow. As of now, we can see that there are information and there is a loggers and save the changes and observe the result. Save this request and I'm going to add one more request. You can even drag and drop, or on the lower left corner we have a book symbol, hide sidebar icon on the lower left corner. You can click on it so that we can hide this and add this as a first successful. Send the request and you can observe the result is coming from system C and this is the information. And observe this, so this is the item CE02 and send a request. So we are getting the information from the first route itself only. For that, let me do one thing. I'm going to add a transformation here. And I'm going to add the result as mapping. So here I'm going to mention source. So from where we are getting the response. I'm going to name it as system C and list the items. So list of items will be from the subflow response. So it is payload. Add it. And in the second route of the transfer method, mention source as system B and here items as payload. Let us understand this. Save the changes and deploy it. Once the deployment is successful, send a request. Now we can see that the information is coming from source system C. Always we are getting the response from system C. If there is any expression failure or any process failure within that particular route, then it will try to execute the next route of events or next route of message process. So for that, let us try to add one error. So to raise error manually, what we can do, we can have configure the raise error component. So because we wanted to throw an exception. So this exception may occur at the start of the particular route or maybe at the end of the route. If it happened, the expression failure has happened, then it is going to send that request to the next route. So I'm going to name it as route 1 error. Error from route 1 and save the changes. I'm gonna sending a request. Now, if we observe, we are having a system B response from the system B route, and here we have a source system B and items. Under items, we are still having one more duplicate key. Let us try to remove that. So payload dot items to have the unique response. I'm sending a new request. And if I observe that, we are having source system B information and the list of items. Since our first route is having some issue and it was unable to provide a response or unable to execute all the message processors successfully and having some issue or exception in the first route, it is trying to execute the next or immediate route of that particular exception. So it is going to execute this system B route. If we are having an exception in the system B also, then how is it going to behave? Let us test that. I'm going to raise error, and here we are going to add a route 2 error. Save changes and deploy it. And we need to observe the logs carefully. So I'm sending a request from Postman. And from Postman, if we see that it is trying to execute system C route, and after that it is trying to execute system B route. And even in the system B also, it is having some issue. So the error has been raised, route 2 error and error from route 2. And we can observe that error response from the service. It is throwing 500 service error or server error and error from route 2. What are the error that we have configured within the rise error? In generally, we do not configure this rise error. So whenever there is an expression failure or data error or service error from that particular route, then it is going to raise the error from that route and it will try to execute the next route to show that we are adding the raise error components. Let us try to add the error handling here just to see what is the exception that are going to throw. I'm adding an on error propagate and within this add a logger. We have scatter gather exception and copy this and add it to all the components. Error message. You can configure this particular message so that you can see the message as well. I'm going to add a breakpoint and observe the result. So here, choice router exception, add the error. So we have configured on error propagate and the error dot error message in all the routes. So let us try to throw an exception. I'm going to log some message and convert that as a number. So here payload dot supplier name, I want to convert it as number. And let us observe the scenario. Here also we have a variable and trying to convert that as number. So it is throwing an exception. On round robin, we will add error. Systemd root payload.supplier name as number. So now we have configured the errors in each and every service. Redeploy the service. Run in debug mode. Now let us try to execute one by one. I am going to test choice router and status active. And let us go step by step. It is throwing an error because there is an array and it is unable to convert an array into number. Okay. In this condition is matched and it is trying to execute the message process in that particular route. And whenever there is an exception thrown from that particular route, it is going to throw the exception for the entire choice route. So let us see what kind of exception. It has thrown MULE expression and we can see that error. Let us now try to execute the scatter gather. So it is going to execute the event in parallel processing so that it will be more efficient and we can get the response in less time. So it will be performance oriented supplier number. It is a string unable to convert to number. And we'll see what kind of exception it is throwing. If we observe here, it is throwing the MULE composite routing exception because it is the scatter gather. So from scatter gather, whenever there is exception, all the routes will be impacted and it will not proceed further and it is going to throw an exception. If we want to handle that exception, we can do that, but it will be a different way. Like we need to use the try scope and then on the particular component and we need to proceed further. That is a different concept. Now try to execute the round robin. Here, send a request. I have received a request to the service. We call the function and unable to convert. So it is going to throw an exception. And from round robin, we can see that it is throwing a MULE expression as of now. So it is depends what is the expression and that is causing the failure and accordingly it will throw an exception. But if there is any exception in the particular route, the round robin itself will be failed and it will throw the exception. So So this is the error and it is throwing 500 server error. Now try to execute first successful. So in first successful, we have seen that it is going to execute the series of events in that particular route. So till now, it is able to execute three components in the first route. But whenever it is trying to execute the fourth component, it is having some issue and raising an error. So error from route 1. So that the event or the request will be processed to the next route. So we have received request and let us see. So in second route also, the three events or three message processors are executed successfully, but the fourth component or fourth message process having some issue and it is throwing an error. So let us see what kind of exception it will throw. We can see that the error type is route to error because we have configured the custom error. If we are going to have some different issue here and it will throw that particular type of error. We can see that as well. So we can see error from route 2. Now I am going to remove these errors and I will add payload.supply name as number in both the routes in the logouts. Now try to send a request for the first successful service. So there is an issue, MULE expression issue. And in second route also, there is a MULE expression issue. So in first successful route also, it is throwing an exception of the particular issue. So in this way, we can configure and execute all the routes. It is depending on the type of requirement, we are going to configure this. So we have discussed choice router, scatter gather, round robin router, and first successful router with the different use cases. And based on the requirement that we receive within the organization, we have to define the different routes and we can implement the APIs or flows. Thank you. Please like, share, and subscribe.